Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanez Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the 2017 film Phantom Thread, and I am honored to welcome to the show Ryan McQuade. Ryan, welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Rob. How are you doing?
Pretty good, dealing with the COVID world, and as best we can. We talked about for a while prior to hitting record, just relating like, how are you doing? We're like, fuck, as best as I can. So hanging in there, and tell people a little bit about who you are and what you have going on for people that don't know.
Well, my name is Ryan McQuade, as Rob said, and I am a writer and podcaster for a couple of platforms. So I write a lot of my pieces over at awardcircuit.com, which is run by Clayton Davis and a lot of great people over there. I think you've heard one of our contributors before, Karen Peterson, on this podcast, and Karen's great, as well as a ton of other writers we have over there. And I appear sometimes on the Circuit Breaker podcast, which is just kind of like a free form. Most of the time we cover the Oscar kind of podcast, doing the best we can right now during these crazy circumstances. But and then my other gig is I'm a podcaster and writer over at InSessionFilm.com. And so over there, I co-host the Extra Film podcast. And so we usually focus over there on the indie films or the movies that normally don't get covered by JD Durant and Brendan Cassidy on the main show. And I do that show with Mr. Jay Ledbetter. And we started at the beginning of this year changing it up, Rob, because last year we seemed at times we were doing like some movies, some partnerships that we were just like not really enthusiastic about. And so this year we decided what we're going to do is we're going to do like in the front half of our episodes some movie series, and then in the back half we'll do a new release. And that worked out perfectly because then the limited releases started becoming very limited, and there wasn't a lot, the theaters shut down and there were no festivals. So it was kind of the perfect time to go back and explore franchises. We started with the James Bond franchise, and we went through, I think, about like one or at least two per Bond. And we went really in depth with that. And then we started diving into directors' filmographies. So we did Robert Altman. We did 10 movies on that. And now we're starting our David Lean series. And so, and that's kind of what we've been doing and what we're going to keep doing throughout the rest of the year, because it gets us to check off some blind spots off our resumes. And that's ultimately, I think, what's just as good as seeing new movies as seeing older movies and having an appreciation for both.
Yeah, and that's part of what I love about this show, is that sometimes I've been able to go back and watch some older movies that people bring to the table that I had never gotten a chance or never made the time to check out on. So you mentioned the Oscar coverage. So what is kind of your thoughts on what's going to go down with the next Oscar race, considering all the changes and rules? I know as of this recording, I think I saw today that the Academy is letting agents now vote for the nominees. Would you care to weigh in on what the hell the Oscars are going to look like next year?
I really don't want to, but yeah, no, sure, I can. Well, the other thing is I forgot to mention is that I do on In Session Film, I do also my own Oscar show, which is called Chasing the Gold. And we recently did an episode kind of talking about a lot of this and where we felt the industry was before, obviously the theaters pushed back Tenet and Mulan and yes, the agents, which make up like 1% of the Academy now, of the voting body. It's like 111 members, and it's been this fight for years, and it's a very big eye roll. I'm sure the Academy is going to get some backlash for it, and it just seems very unnecessary. And and I saw a lot of people freaking out, and I'm just like, I don't have the time for it. Like, there's too much going on. Like that. Like, who cares about them? Actually, just care about
in a nutshell.
Yeah, like it basically what I think of agents. Who gives a crap? Just give them the vote and tell them to shut up.
Yeah.
They'll be happy. But as for the Oscars, I mean, look, they moved it back to April of next year. They extended the eligibility window. They announced some really good stuff, like they're going to go back to a 10 film lineup after this year. So that's something to look forward to. They're going to do within that next year these kind of academies, blocks of screeners. So every quarter they'll send like screeners of movies that were going to be eligible for Oscars. So then we could probably see some more films from the beginning half of the year be represented at the Oscars. And because usually all those screeners get sent out the latter part of the year, and then those newer movies are coming out and they have all the buzz. So the movies from the beginning half of the year, they get put down at the bottom of those piles. And then that's why like something like 1917 or Little Women can come out in the last second and they can steal a bunch of Oscar nominations from something earlier in the year, right?
Right.
And then something like The Farewell or Us or Booksmart, they don't get the recognition they deserve. So, and I think a lot of people are worried about that with the extended eligibility. But if the theaters keep pushing back, movies are going to get pushed back in terms of getting into the theaters. I still think something like Defy Bloods is going to be a big player. It's Netflix. Netflix is going to have a huge presence, even though they're not going to be really campaigning a lot at the film festivals. They're going to kind of just save their monies for ad campaigns and things like that. I think sort of when we start getting back to theaters opening up, September is opening up, Telluride's going to happen. They're going to do a virtual Toronto. Venice, for the love of God, for some reason is going to happen. And we'll start slowly having it by the end of the year, go back to normal-ish when the vaccine starts rolling around. And then, of course, then it'll just be like the mad 4 months instead of like last year where it was very abridged. This year it'll be longer and there'll be more debates and campaigning and all the stuff that a lot of people don't like, but people like me find interesting. And so it could lead to a really interesting winner, because then you also have the election. You know what I mean? And last time, a president was nominated, it was the guy in the White House right now. And the answer to that was something like Moonlight. You know what I mean? And so it was a very purposeful, memorable movie. But if he doesn't get reelected, look for something light or cheerful. And it might be like that because people are going to be like, all right, I'm out of a pandemic. I don't need like some 4-hour movie about existentialism to win Best Picture this year. I need something happy. But it's going to be very up in the air, but it should be really interesting to see how it all plays out now that we have 2 extra months added onto it.
Is there, as of now, we're recording this at the very end of June. Is there any particular movie that you think would not have had a shot at Oscar nominations that now is looking like it'll probably get some of the major nominations?
Oh, I mean, I still think something like, if we were in a regular year, is that what you're kind of asking? Like,
something that, because of the pandemic might have a little bit more of a chance of sneaking in there, since the Oscar race is all over the place already anyway.
I think something like Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Like, I still think that one's a very topical film. It made a lot of money when it was in the box office. We're not going to have a lot of movies that have box office prestige. So that's one going to be that said, oh, we made it for like $5 million and then made a crap ton of money.
Right.
And I think that Elizabeth Moss's performance is great. And you're going to be able to say she's had 2 great performances. And usually the bigger successful ones tend to get the recognition. Something like Shirley will probably go to like Independent Spirit
Awards,
right?
Yeah.
Or the Gothams. But personally, I think that one's, it's very topical. It's a lot like The Five Bloods, right? It's very topical, very entertaining. Those are movies I think that can break through this mold, right? And it's done well on VOD too. People are able to watch it at home, and they're able to be like, yeah, it's more than just like a horror movie. It's reminds me very much of not to the same quality in my opinion, but it reminds me a lot of why the Academy fell in love with Get Out. It has something extra tied to that film, and that's why I still think that could be a big player.
Yeah, that's one of the ones I was thinking as well. Not only because of like the kind of the social commentary in there, and sort of the subtext of the film. I think having it available at home, it sort of feeds into the pandemic paranoia in a way too.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you mentioned Get Out. I think that the Academy has shown a lot of, there's been a lot of groundswell of people trying to get horror to break through in a bigger way. Get Out was probably the most, the best example of that recently, but things like, Toni Collette's performance in Hereditary that got overlooked, and things like that I think it's really sort of, reaching a turning point in the way that perhaps, superhero and comic book movies have done so, with Heath Ledger winning, and then, obviously Joaquin Phoenix winning, and those movies sort of kind of being able to sneak in through the cracks of what an air quotes awards movie is. Because it's, ironically, we're talking about a movie in this episode that is very much what you would think of as an awards movie in large degree. So before we get into Phantom Thread, what are sort of your overall thoughts on PTA and his filmography, and where is he one of your favorite filmmakers? Are you a big proponent of his movies, and if so, why?
I think for most people our age, Paul Thomas Anderson is a very important filmmaker. And for me personally, I echo a lot of what my co-host Jay Ledbetter has said. I think a movie moment in time that I kind of flipped, and it was like, yeah, this is something I love, was back in 2007 when I saw There Will Be Blood in theaters. Weirdly, I saw that with my mom. Don't know why she wanted to go with me, but we ended up going and seeing it, and she actually loved it, and I did too. And I went and saw it again by myself, and I mean, that's a very heavy movie for like 2007 and a young me. But I just remember falling in love with the way he was telling stories. And I had seen Punch Drunk Love, and I had seen Magnolia and Boogie Nights, on old, either VHSs or DVDs, and I just loved them so much. But then that movie was the one that took it over the top. And then ever since then, I have just seen his movies. I've seen them all with my now wife. She was my girlfriend at the time when we saw The Master and Inherent Vice and Phantom Thread. But she's now my wife, and those have been some of our more interesting conversations, interesting theater going experiences. I remember each one. And so I truly think he is one of our last great event filmmakers that shoots on film. I agree with him so much, and some of the other directors as well, like Scorsese and Nolan, about shooting on film and that kind of restoration. And when I see his movies, I make it a great deal to find out where the 70 millimeter or the 35 millimeter prints are being shown so we can watch it. Because I think that it's something special, and I think that that's what Paul Thomas Anderson means to me. It means to a lot of people, not to some, but I get that, and I think he's a unique filmmaker still, as he's made more accessible films. But for me personally, I think he is one of my favorite directors, top 5 for sure.
Okay, yeah, I think there's a certain thing. There's a certain element of, I think that sort of not only level of quality of work, but like very, very focused. I don't know. I'm trying to say something specific, but I'm not getting there.
He's very meticulous.
He is very meticulous, and I will get into why I think Reynolds Woodcock feels very much like a PTA avatar in a way. But I think that he and Daniel Day-Lewis clearly have that in common. If you look at both of their filmographies, the last 30 years, PTA has made, like, I'm looking at the list here, like 8 movies, and Daniel Day-Lewis has made like maybe 10, 11, something like that. Like it takes a lot for them to commit to a project. They're not the kind of artists that just bang out a movie every year or two like clockwork. It takes something very specific to inspire them to want to devote that time to a project and to really kind of see it through, because their visions are so specific. And I think you mentioned about There Will Be Blood kind of being an awakening for you. And for me, when I saw it, I went to see it with my family, which was, I don't know why we did that.
Right?
But
You don't know. I went with my mom. I don't know why we saw it.
I think we were all like expecting something much different than what we got. And so the vibe in that, I grew up in a household where we watched very much mainstream populist entertainment. We weren't really super into the art films. So when I saw it in my early 20s, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I still haven't really gone back to revisit it. And I feel like now I've become so much more of an appreciator of those kinds of movies that I've gone, because I had such sort of a weird experience with There Will Be Blood. I kind of stayed away from PTA stuff since then. And it's only recently that I was like, you know what? Let me go back and watch Magnolia. Let me go back and watch Punch Drunk Love. And actually did an episode on that movie. And I like both of those a lot. So I feel like I'm slowly coming around to where, film Twitter kind of lands on PTA as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and I feel like there's been like this. It happens to, I think, popular directors. So I don't think it's just him. I think, I see it with Nolan. I see it with Spielberg. I see it with Scorsese. I see it with pretty much every director that you're going to say that you love. The majority of people say they love, where there's this pushback on, the quality of his work, or maybe even who he is as a person, which, the guy is like, pretty much been a dad and a good partner to Maya Rudolph the last 20 years or so. That stuff, it never bothers me. I just think that he does make movies that are very challenging. They do take a lot of risks. They aren't for everyone, but I think for the most people, they get at least something out of it. You can find something enjoyable out of every one of his movies, something interesting, thought-provoking. He is one of our last thinking people's director, in my humble opinion. Like when we go to his movies, I never feel like I'm walking out and thinking, wow, that was completely stupid. Like that was dumb. Like, I clicked to something. And I think with that, you and I, Rob, with having that love for him or that intrigue after you see those movies, then you want to go back and see his other stuff and see where he was coming from at those angles. And then, when we come back and look at something like Phantom Thread that's newer and fresher, you're able to pick it apart and dissect it, and it leads to even more understanding. And each time you watch the movies that he makes, you pick up something more. And I find that fascinating.
Right. Yeah. It's weird because I think his movies, at least from my perspective, they do come across almost as a little bit of an acquired taste. It doesn't. His movies never really go down smooth. If you're reading into them, there's a lot there. There's a lot to discuss, to analyze, to break down, and all that good stuff. But if you're not prepared to bring that to the table, if you just want entertainment, not really going to do it for you as much. They are very not off-putting, but I mean, certainly I think elements of this movie are off-putting. And I think that if that's not something if you're not willing to put in the work that PTA or the Daniel Day-Lewis does, you're probably not going to resonate with you. But I think for people like us who are curious about the actor or the filmmaker and their intentions and the fact that everything is so purposeful and everything is so delicately choreographed on a narrative scale, I think that there is there's a lot there's a lot beneath the surface, basically.
Yeah. I think some directors make movies for audiences, and some directors just make movies.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think his biggest influence is Robert Altman. Robert Altman didn't make a lot of movies for people. He made them because he's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to tell. And, for a good 10 years, 12 year stint in the 70s, Robert Altman made like 11, 12 movies in a row. And he just got to do whatever he wanted. And because MASH was such a big success, he got like carte blanche, right? And that's the same with PTA. Like, every now and then, like he'll make a movie, like he'll make a Boogie Nights or a Magnolia and puts them on the big front, and then he makes Punch Drunk Love, and then he makes There Will Be Blood, and it's like everyone's talking about as the best film of the decade, right?
Right.
So then he makes The Master and Inherent Vice, and he makes Phantom Thread, and they're like, okay, this guy, he knows how to make them on small budgets, but then, he just does it on his own thing. Like, it's not about accessibility. It's not about like how many people he can get in this theater at this. It's like, hey, I'm making a movie. This is what it is. You want to see it, come and see it. But it's my thing. It's not, and then I think that makes you, as an audience member or as a critic or whatever you are, I think that makes you have to interpret it on your own more sometimes than you are having to interpret it under him, because you have to initially grapple with it yourself. And then, like you said, you have to go back and dissect it and figure out, okay, what is he telling me? Because now I think I know what he's telling me. Now, what is he actually telling me? Or do they line up? You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. I think that's kind of a good segue into the actual movie itself. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer for Phantom Thread.
You can sew almost anything into the canvas of a coat. When I was a boy, I started to hide things in the linings of the garments. Things that only I knew were there. Secrets.
Good morning.
Will you have dinner with me?
Yes.
I feel as if I've been looking for you for a very long time. You look beautiful. Very beautiful. I have things I want to do. Things I simply cannot do without you.
Reynolds has made my dreams come true, and I have given him what he desires most in return. Every piece of me. Why are you not married?
That was a little bit of the trailer for Phantom Thread from 2017, written and directed, of course, by Paul Thomas Anderson. We were talking about Oscars earlier. This was obviously nominated for a bunch, including Best Picture, Best Actor, and naturally, given the sort of world in which this is set, one for costume design, which, of course, it's one of those obvious wins that you give the Oscar for costume design to the movie about fashion, and I think well deserved in that case. So, we sort of, I guess, tell me a little bit about what is it about this movie that you love? And secondly, this is supposedly Daniel Day-Lewis's last movie. Do you think he's going to actually stick to that this time?
Okay, so that's two questions.
That's two questions.
Okay, so I'll answer the latter first, which is I don't think this will be Daniel Day-Lewis's last movie.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Thomas Anderson will get a trilogy out of him, and they will at one point down the road do something again. Either Paul Thomas Anderson or Martin Scorsese, one of those two. Like, I think that, if Marty's able to get Pesci out of kind of like semi-retirement for the
That's
Irish,
a good point. Yeah.
He can get, Daniel Day-Lewis, because he's worked on Age of Innocence, and he's worked on Gangs of New York with him. So, I think that could happen. And it's been 3 years now, 4 years probably since he shot this.
Mm-hmm.
The itch will come alive. Trust me. For a guy like Daniel Day-Lewis, who I would say is the greatest actor, of his generation, one of the greatest actors of all time, that doesn't leave you. You can go and cobble as much as you want in like Montana or wherever he lives at, but at a certain point you want to go and do some work.
He seems like he has an interesting relationship with the craft too. It's just, he's clearly obviously not in it for the fame. He's clearly not in it to just like, keep busy or anything like that. He it's hard to imagine him doing a Wired autocomplete interview, that kind of thing, or like making the doing carpool karaoke or something, like in this sort of viral world that we live in. And, he comes out every few years and makes a movie and then kind of retreats. And just because he's, as you were saying, one of the best actors of our time. And I think that's because he commits so much time and energy to it that by the end of it, he's just like, I don't want to do this again for a while. Just like, I'll tell them I'm retiring because I don't want the pressure of, hey, Daniel, when's your next movie? It's like, I'm done until I decide I'm not to. Kind of, share with her like farewell tours every 5 years or whatever. But yes, I think you're probably onto something there.
As for the film Phantom Thread itself. Look, I love Paul Thomas Anderson, and I love, like I said, There Will Be Blood, and that was the last time Daniel Day-Lewis and PTA worked together. They made a masterpiece. You know, they made one of the greatest American films of not just the 21st century, but I think of all time. You know, a movie that just deeply tackles the idea of American capitalism in this like 3-hour Western epic, you know, and I felt like Daniel Day-Lewis got a lot of credit for that because of his towering performance.
Mm-hmm.
But behind that is also PTA's beautiful direction, Johnny Greenwood's amazing score, you know, the great cinematography. Like that movie is just great. Like, and the people that say otherwise, it's just like, come on, I know deep down you know it's great, you know what I mean? Like I know it. But so I had very much a big hype for this, right? I think when you see something like that and it's formative in your years, and you see that those collaborators are coming back together, Greenwood, PTA, DDL, you're like, oh my God, yes. And then you hear he's kind of influence. I heard that it was very Rebecca-esque, which is one of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movies. I love Rebecca. And I think it's the only film I think Hitchcock won Best Picture for, one of his only films. Yes. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then it was all about like fashion, which was weird. Like it was like a weird twist for PTA to like go down the fashion line. But I was like, okay, sure. Like we'll go down there. And then I saw the trailer, and the trailer played it off like a thriller, right? And almost like with some horror elements.
Right.
And so therefore I was like, okay, there's no way it's like that, because PTA is also a master subverter of expectations as well. So I said, okay, this will be interesting. So I went to an early screening of this with my wife. We sat kind of like, I think because it was so packed, it's like second row on the right. And so I was like, kind of have my neck all the way up. And from the opening, it just consumed me, and I was melted away by the score, by, like you say, Mark Bridges' costume design, DDL's performance, but then also Leslie Manville, Vicky Krieps, who's extraordinary, and the humor around this movie, which I mean, we'll talk about probably more. I didn't think it was going to be as funny and as biting as any movie I've seen in quite some time. And ultimately, by the end, I had this smile on my face. And the reason why is because I think this movie really encapsulates what it is like, not just for an artist to be in a relationship, but for somebody to be in a relationship. Mm-hmm. It is a constant battle for control. Like psychologists just talk about it for years. And that's exactly what this movie does. And it switches left and right. But ultimately, in the end, the control is in the hand of Vicky Krieps. It's in Alma's hands. And it's such an interesting way of telling the story, and how it's kind of semi-inspired by DDL and his marriage, and Paul Thomas Anderson and his marriage to Maya Rudolph when he got sick, and all those origins with it. But ultimately, it is one of the more interesting romantic drama comedies I've ever seen. And it has some biting things to say and some controversial things with it as well that people have talked to me about over the years. But each time I see it, I pick up more and more. And I mean, I told you off air, I wrote like 4.5 pages of notes for this thing, and I could have kept going. But yeah, I think it was my number 5 film of last decade. And it was my number 1 film of that year. And it wasn't even close. So yeah, I just love this movie.
Wow. Yeah. For me, I mean, because being more of a PTA convert, I guess. It on a surface level, watching this movie, because this was the second time I'd seen it preparing for this episode, following the theatrical release, it feels very, like, on the surface level, it's very frustrating to watch because of how Reynolds Woodcock is.
Yes.
And because, I think it's easy to walk away from this movie, and this is probably more of the vibe I got from it the first time, of it being sort of a portrait of obviously toxic masculinity and
yes,
and all that stuff. But in a way, it reminded me of a lot of those those movies that basically focus on an artist trying to identify like the price of genius or perfection or whatever. So movies like Whiplash or Black Swan or Birdman or even Mother. And this sort of gave me sort of a Mother vibe for a large part of it, just because it is sort of the dynamic between an artist and, his significant other. And in contrast to that movie where Javier Bardem basically literally uses up Jennifer Lawrence's character, this is sort of the complete opposite of that, where Vicky Creeps, where Alma is able to sort of take control, and in that way it subverts it subverts what you were saying, subverts expectations, but it subverts the kind of the story that it's been telling, in a way. It's telling you, it's comes across initially as this movie of this, very pompous, very meticulous, very kind of damaged, because obviously he's got all kinds of, issues with his mother and control issues and like all this pressure that he's under, which again is very true to life as far as creators and people like that. And it almost comes across as like quasi-abusive relationship at certain points because of the way he treats Alma and things like that. But the fact that she retains control in the end and sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, tames him, I think is a really interesting switch that happens. And not only the way that she's able to retain the control, but the fact that I feel like we should talk about the ending and then kind of work backwards.
Let me get to those notes.
The fact that they basically end up sort of co-conspirators at the end of this movie.
Yes. Yes.
He realized, I like the fact that he is incredibly hard to deal with. I mean, she says in the very beginning, what he desires, I give him what he desires most in return, every piece of me. Again, maybe which reminded me of Mother. Maybe he's the most demanding yet man, and I wrote down fuck yes. And the fact that he is self-aware enough to know that about himself and to basically, kind of concede to Alma that he needs her help in saving him from himself, kind of thing. And I think that in and of itself makes, I think helps me sort of get a better grasp on what PTA is doing, because so much of the runtime of the film is sort of frustrating, and me being like, why is she with this guy? What an asshole! He's treating her like completely disrespectful and all that other stuff. And the fact that it comes back around, and I guess I'm just like babbling on here about this. So what's sort of your take on the ending, and then I guess we can kind of work backwards in the plot here.
Well, I think when I first saw the ending, I was shocked. But I've seen this movie so many times now. The ending is the acceptance of Reynolds realizing that Alma has control of all of this. Like, if you watch this film, and I know we're doing the ending, but you have to watch it and kind of slow it down. I think that's why this movie is so great. Throughout this movie, there are moments of silence between the two characters. There's these analyzations, right, where a character doesn't say anything to another, and the other character becomes basically consumed with wanting to know the answer, right? This happens very early on at like dinner and the breakfast scene, right? The breakfast scene at the beginning, which is wonderful. And in that you can tell that this great fashion designer, Reynolds Woodcock, has done this to women over and over again, where he kind of uses them up or just kind of has his fun with them. But then, Cyril, played by Leslie Manville, kind of just takes, gets rid of him quietly and says, he's no longer in love with you anymore. Like, the flame and passion's not there, right? It's kind of his sidekick. And throughout the film, as he starts to fall for Alma and they start having these, these battles for control, right? It goes to the whole things of like when she's, talking about the fabric's not right. And then it's you want to get yourself into trouble, but not too much trouble, kind of that whole tit for tat. And then that keeps going on with, little things, right? As in a relationship, as you find, like, you're working on something and your wife walks into the room and she starts vacuuming, or she starts cooking and moving pots and pans around, or in this case, butters really hard toast, and it throws you all off. And as the film goes on, those quiet moments, Alma's waiting for responses from Reynolds. And the last one she gets of that kind of waiting on him is, or at least this last significant one for me, is when she says she loves him after the whole thing with Barbara Rose and the dress. And he doesn't really respond. So at that point, she realizes he's being the stubborn ass that he is, and she takes matters into her own hands, right? She gets the control. And then when he's sick and he gets healed by her, not knowing that she's the one that got him sick, but she's also the one that healed him, right? And that she has his life in the palm of his hand and can wave that magic wand whenever she wants to, right? He asks her to marry her, and her response is silence, right? And it is just this whole, like, he looks so manic, like, what are you waiting? He even says, like, what are you doing? Like, what do you, and she takes a deep breath, she shakes her head off, and she smiles. She basically does exactly what he's doing right back at him, right? Yeah. And so she does this throughout the rest of the film. And it was that point, right, where he starts slowly but surely realizing that he's changed. Like, he has to change. Like, he cannot be the same person that he used to be. He has to be a good man. He has to be a good husband. He has to be less abrasive to those around him, right? Even yelling at someone like Cyril, right? She can take it because she knows what her brother's like. But she even says, like, I don't want to hear this anymore because it hurts my ears, which is an all-time great line.
Yeah.
And so by the end, she makes this overabundance of these mushrooms in this omelet, which my wife will never make me mushrooms in an omelet again. I fear for myself. And I watch whatever I say, because I never know when mushrooms are going to make it into the dinner at night here. But that is him figuring it out and realizing, oh, she's exactly what I need. She knows exactly who I am. She is that person that I have gone and said that, there's so many things that I want to do and things that I need to do. But overall, she consumes the control. She is the I guess, for a lack of a better term, but it's kind of like that thing that we ask in a previous movie, like, who really is the master in The Master, right? In this movie, Alma becomes the master. She becomes the one in control. And she even, within her flash forwards, which I think are true statements that actually happen, because he's taught her the craft, like his mother taught him the craft, she becomes, basically a conduit and becomes what he is, a partner, an actual partner in life and in work. And they find that balance. And that's why at the end of the film, it goes back to them, like as the credits are rolling thing, it goes back to them working on a dress together, as opposed to them working apart, those early mornings, because by the end of this film, they are partners. They aren't separate people at each other's throats. And yes, there's going to be arguments over the years, and she's probably going to have to make him more mushroom omelets, but it's the acknowledgement that he's changing, he's getting better, and she knows it, and he acknowledges it. And then therefore at the end, he gives her his undying love and like just is fixated on her towards the end of that film.
So you find the ending, which to me came across as, I think, I don't know, dysfunctional for sure. The whole mushroom omelet thing. In fact, that she's just going to have to poison him every once in a while to remember, so he remembers why he loves her. It seems like. So you consider that sort of a, I don't know, a happy ending for them, or at least a sign of progress that he's making an effort and recognizing the faults within himself.
Yes.
Okay.
Because if you go back a couple scenes before, there is the whole thing with the ballroom and New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And there is that acceptance there of, it's that feeling that we've all felt in relationships where we probably said something or whatnot and gotten mad, or we're at a party, but we can't not be with the person we love. Like he ultimately does love Alma. Like this isn't some manipulative relationship. They do actually love each other. They work for each other. Like, as much as he's fighting it because he believes in this stupid curse, and you've lived life this certain way for so many years, right? As a bachelor, and just and not conforming to change, or having someone that's as smart and intelligent and talented or just as crafty of playing mind games as anybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then obviously you become bored by it. He's never bored through this movie, right, as he clearly falls in love with her. But when I totally didn't realize this, but the dress she's wearing at the New Year's Eve party, that's the dress they made together.
Oh wow, I hadn't even noticed that.
Yeah, like I noticed that this time. I was like, oh my God, that's why she's wearing it. And when he storms out, he takes the double take because he realizes, oh my God, I made this terrible mistake. Like it's what guys have done throughout lives. We've done stupid things, or we say, oh, I'm working on this, or oh, I'm writing this, I can't pay attention. And then we realize like our wives actually wanted us, or our significant others actually wanted us to look at them and appreciate them and acknowledge them, and our stubbornness get in the way. And she doesn't necessarily 100% forgive him there. There's not a forgiveness, but
right.
But there's no conversation, because it's when he reaches his hand out to her, it's an acknowledgement of like, yeah, I fucked up. Like I'm sorry.
The fact that he even went to the party, I think, is already sort of a huge step forward for him. Yeah.
And so then one of the final shots of the film is them in the middle of that dance floor holding each other ever so tightly. And especially Reynolds holding her, because as much as he puts up this facade of being this, I can do anything by myself, and we built this house, and she casts a shadow, and no. It's all a front, because she actually sees him for who he is. He's not as tough as he plays out to be. He's a softie. And he's a person that is a product of structure and discipline. So what more structure and discipline than you falling out of line, your wife putting you back on course with this poison, you know what I mean? And setting you straight. And I mean, and him realizing it's technically the medicine he needs.
Right.
And so, yeah, I find it to be, at first I found it jarring. As I've gone on and on and on, I find it to be extremely romantic.
Yeah. I feel like that moment at the end, at least initially, it does sort of play to me like a thriller, like a twist kind of thing. Like the fact that not only that she's poisoning him again, but the fact that he's aware of it and he's like kind of into that idea. I don't know, for some reason that makes it more upsetting to be like, wait, what's happening now? This is just, they're accepting that this is like the status quo of their marriage. And I guess everybody's relationship is different, but it's just, I don't know, that doesn't seem healthy to me. But I mean, you're sort of helping me to see a little bit more of the fact that he is trying to do better, maybe if nothing else, to motivate him to not have to have another mushroom omelet.
No, I think you saw how many she put in the pan, like, and even he acknowledged, go get your doctor.
Like,
I don't.
Shit, yeah,
like, you don't trust me, and there at the end he goes, I trust you. I just
That's a lot of mushrooms.
You know what I mean? How many times have we were like, yeah, honey, I trust you, but you know what? Just get that thing over there just in case. You know what I mean? So,
And there's so many things going on there too. I mean, when they meet, she's the waitress that brings him this like very specific breakfast order.
oh my God.
She writes him a note, you know, with her name to the hungry boy. So it's like kind of plays into the whole omelet ending. The fact that obviously he's kind of hallucinates his dead mother during that scene when he's poisoned, and he's clearly got unresolved parenting issues, and she ends up kind of having to be sort of a mother figure in a way, and that's how she breaks through. The fact that earlier in the film, she realizes that like everything's a game to you, and so she's just like, okay, these are the rules to the game. Let me kind of flip the script on Reynolds and kind of play my own game back. And I think that the way that she challenges him like that is ultimately what helps her distinguish herself from the endless line of what is it, Joanna, who is
the
talking
endless
about
line of
on.
Joanna's, right?
Yeah, he's like, I'll give her the October dress. As like, thanks for playing.
Yeah,
you didn't win this game.
It feels like when this movie also is very meta. We haven't talked about that. I think this movie is extremely meta. I mean, PTA is in a relationship with an actress. Daniel Day-Lewis is in a relationship with a director. They know, but they're also, these pragmatic guys, right? And it must not be easy to live with a guy who wants to be known as Daniel Plainview for 7-8 months, or known as Abraham Lincoln for 6 or 8 months, or to be Maya Rudolph and have to, in the writing process for these strangely bizarre films at times, to be around that artist. I mean, I remember seeing a DGA conversation, or it wasn't DGA, it was like Santa Monica or Santa Barbara Film Festival. And they had all the directors up there for this year, 2017, for Best Director. And Nolan talked about how his wife, the great producer Emma Thompson, she said that, and his kids said that he's basically Reynolds Woodcock. Like when he's writing and setting up his movies, and they basically they called him that year Woodcock around the house, right? And so it very much does feel like when we see the dress made for Henrietta at the beginning of the film, that feels like PTA showcasing a movie at a premiere, right? Yeah. And because it's very much like there's all these people, right, that are kind of foofing it up or moving things, but he's walking around it, right? Like as his director would, like scoping it out, right? And as DDO walks around it and he kind of just holds on to the shoulders and he thinks about it as one last second, envisioning how it's going to look probably the night she walks down that, those staircases. And he says, let's take it for a stroll, meaning that's probably like, a screening for the press or something like that, right? And this idea of, then she says, it'll bring me courage for probably Henrietta's, tragedy that we don't really know about. But it takes a lot of courage to release, a project you've worked on 3 or 4 years out into the world. And then you're spent, you're done, right? You don't have a lot of inspiration. But what you get through the person you live with, your family, whatever that is, you get hunger. And what is the number one thing that this movie is always referring to when he has that itch again to work, and it's mostly from Alma? It's the hunger, the drive to want to create and keep doing it. And throughout the rest of the film, nobody else gives him that drive the way she does. And she does it through, yes, playing her game, which is a wonderful game, right? Because, he basically tells her, if you don't like this and the way this is doing, then you can F off. You can go back to where you came from. And she doesn't just take that because she does love him. She goes, no, sir. You're going to play my game, and we're going to play it by my rules. Otherwise, there ain't going to be no game anymore. It'll be done. And it's such a great way of thinking it, because partnerships are not a one-sided thing. They are a two-sided thing. And so he has control dominance at the beginning. Obviously, she has it by the end more than he does, I think. And that's good because some relationships, like, look, some relationships, they work as a balance. Some of them work with one's being over the other. But she is, by taking control, gaining balance into his life that he desperately needs. And therefore, they can have cohesion. They can have a family. He can share his work even more with her and trust her and not say bullshit like there's this cloud in this house. That's not the case. It's, everybody has the oh, did I make the right decision? He just had cold feet after he married her, as opposed to having it before. You know what I mean? So I think that ultimately it's about hunger, balance, and this filmmaker and this actor who work side by side to create the story, showing that behind every great man is the woman that they're with, who inspires them, challenges them, and ultimately controls their own destiny by the end.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderfully complex dynamic though too, and I think it's one that's really easy to misinterpret. I think, and that's probably part of why I didn't appreciate the film as much the first time, is because it's easy to watch this and see him sort of.
It's very easy to see him as a misogynistic person.
Using the woman as a muse for inspiration, and it's sort of almost a form of objectification. The way that he immediately after their date, they go home and he's fitting her and he's like, oh, you have no breasts. He's like, it's okay. That's my job to give them to you if I so choose. And I'm like, ew. He's just like, I'm in control. This is my realm, but he's so used to that. And it's easy to kind of walk away from the movie being like, well, why am I rooting for this relationship? Look at this guy. She should just bail when he says, why don't you just fuck off? And ultimately the whole point of the movie, as you were mentioning, is that he is a mess under the surface. He knows that he has to put up a big face because what does he mention? He said he's got a sour heart. He's trying to break the curse. He mentions all this stuff, and he says he's incurable. That he's just like he's clearly got a bunch of self-loathing and other issues kind of plaguing him, probably guilt and grief over his mother. And it ultimately kind of reveals that, you may have started this movie thinking this guy is an asshole and he's treating these women, terribly. And yes, that's the case, but it's only because he doesn't know what to do with himself, because men, at least according to this movie, are a mess without a partner to balance them out, to give them the tough love in the form of a mushroom omelet or whatever, and sort of bring peace to their home. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, you're hitting it perfectly. And I think in terms of partner, he never really had a partner in a relationship that wasn't his sister. Like Cyril is that for him, right? Like Cyril is this, he calls her his old so-and-so. That's what you say to like somebody you're in a relationship, that's like kind of like those Rebecca themes, right? Of like these weird things, that are said. And it's like this weird relationship that this third person, right?
Well, there's that dinner that he shows that he goes to with Alma, and then Cyril sort of comes out of nowhere, and as the viewer, you're just sort of like, oh, this is a 3-person date. Oh, okay, that's kind of weird.
Well, and even before that, I mean, she shows up at the cottage, and she does say she's coming, but you forget because you're like on this date, right? And she just and she walks up to Alma and like smells her, right? And it's like, oh, interesting, I mean, and she exactly, and she's examining her just as much as he's examining Alma as well. But Alma's examining both of them because as Cyril opens the book for the measurements, she is like, Alma's like scanning her, right? This whole movie is looks. This movie says so much more than just the crackling dialogue that's on screen. Every character has these looks, like at breakfast, the second time, where Alma has learned to butter her toast correctly without pissing off Reynolds, right? And she just gives Cyril this look of a smile, and it takes Cyril aback, right? Like, none of these girls have ever cared to smile at me, to acknowledge my importance. You know what I mean? To see me as a person rather than just like basically his partner in this enterprise that they're running, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when Alma brings up the idea of the birthday thing, or I'm sorry, not the birthday thing, it's more of a surprise thing. It's not his birthday. That's correct.
Right.
So when she brings that up, she's very hesitant. But when she goes along with it, and when I initially saw it, I thought it was cold, like with the way Cyril says, "Good luck," right, and walks out. But the more I've watched it, and if you just kind of think about it, there is a little. If you listen to the voice inflection, it is not actually mean at all. It is a little hopeful. Like, I actually want you to do well with this. That's why I'm letting you do this. You know what I mean? Like, I want you to succeed because she knows that she can't take care of him forever either. Right. And so then by the end, when Alma and Cyril have that good relationship, right? When he's like, "Oh, you guys just crack on together." You know what I mean? It's because A, that's her sister-in-law at that moment, but B,
Right.
she knows how much work Alma has put in there. She knows how much respect she cares for the craft. And she also knows that she's the successor to hand all of this off. Like, obviously, the mom was a big part of that. Cyril then took over that. And now Alma is. And it's the caretaker idea, but it's also the person to put in his place. Because remember when he yells at Cyril, you get
God, of course I do.
the best scene of the film, where don't you speak to me like that? I'll put you into the floor and you won't be able to get up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's caretaking in sheep's clothing, because it's ultimately control.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Cyril is in control. Alma's in control. The women that make that dress overnight that he damages, the wedding dress, they're all in control. He is just this boy, really, this, that can't get over himself. And so ultimately this is like a movie, yes, where this man gets the credit, but ultimately it's the women around him that make him who he is. And
Right.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, he's the name on the House of Woodcock, but he has all these women that without whom he's just a pile in the corner, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I love that we finally got into Cyril and Alma's sort of dynamic, which starts as a kind of competition and then grows into some mutual respect, and the fact that I think the big twist, the big turn there is during the first poisoning, where Alma's closes the door. Cyril's like, "Come on, let's leave. Let's get out of the room." And she's like, "Okay," follows her out, closes the door behind her, goes right back to Reynolds. Alma is even mistakenly called Mrs. Woodcock at that point, before they even get married or anything. Yeah, by the doctor. So it's really, it is sort of that transition of Cyril. In a way, Cyril has been the holding all the cards this whole time. She's been running the household and letting Reynolds kind of take the lead on it, basically, in a way that Alma does at the end. And it's almost like you're saying, I think it is like Cyril's just like, "Oh, thank God, shift change. I don't have to do this anymore. I can not have to, be the one to put up with all his bullshit and all this other stuff." I love that. And Leslie Manville, we mentioned here already, she's so great in this movie, in that scene, and pretty much everything she does on screen. And this is really such a true three-hander, which you don't really see that very often. You don't usually see movies that are just three characters kind of in a house, and it's just about the power struggle between the three of them back and forth. And I love that about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it is in the vein of Rebecca, because that movie is a three-hander,
right?
And that also deals with the ghost of Rebecca. This deals with the ghost of his mother, and who taught him his trade, and ultimately he feels cursed by, right? And so there's all those like little wonderful things that he just kind of throws in there. But yeah, I mean, I love Cyril because of the fact that like when we really first see her, like when she goes to the door to answer it for Henrietta at the beginning of the film, she's just got this very like, she's composed herself. She's picked her, she is that person in there, right? That she cleans up all of his messes. She is the one that really does run the whole thing. Like you said, I also love the scene where, it's right after Alma smiles at her and she kind of like, okay, well, I guess I am a person in this whole place. And she reminds Reynolds of Barbaro's, coming and the wedding and that he might get invited to it. And he just kind of like, really, you're going to tell me this? And she says it point blank to him. She's like, that woman pays for this house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is another thing, like, it's like a meta thing too, is I thought of that being like PTA more than Daniel Day-Lewis in that scene of like some big studio head coming that you hate. You know what I mean? Somebody that is despicable or has bad taste or is very about themselves. And you're just like, okay, sure, I'll give them the film they want. I'll give them the meeting, right? Oh, I have to go to lunch with them next week at their, son's bar mitzvah or whatever. Sure, I'll do that. Oh, I got to go to, another charity event with them. Yeah, okay, sure. Because I need to pay for the bills, right? I need to make sure that this place is good. And then that person, said, it's kind of like they're wearing the dress, right? So they like are showcasing his film or the idea, his pitch or whatever. And the person gets drunk and makes a fool of it. And then you have like Alma there saying like, that woman doesn't deserve your work, therefore that person probably, and I don't know if this has ever happened to PTA, you'd have to answer it, but it feels like a studio head crapping all over his work. He gets the inspiration from his wife, to get his work back, get the rights back, and they take it back in the middle of the night through this crazy scene. But in the movie, it is, we're going up to the room and we're taking the dress.
Right. And that's another scene where on the one hand, I'm like, holy crap, they're just going in and ripping clothes off the sleeping woman. I'm like, it's kind of, it's one of those real like WTF moments in this movie. Like, wait, so what's happening? What are they doing? But in the context of the movie and their relationship, that's where she proves to him that she cares just as much about his work as he does.
Because he's like, oh, don't start crying. Like, it's bad enough I'm already here, and then you're going to cry. And she's like, I'm not crying. Like, you should be pissed.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I'm agree with you on, and it's like, and he's like, all right, let's go. And then he doesn't go do it. He tells Alma to go do it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like because obviously that would look really bad if he like, went and did that.
Yeah.
But obviously she has the passion behind her to go and be like, yeah, this is messed up. And then she's the one carrying the dress over her shoulder as they're walking down the street laughing and kissing. You know what I mean? Like she cares about that dress. She cares about his work. And that's ultimately why she cares about him. You know what I mean? Because you care about, your significant other's passions or their craft or whatever in life, then the little things that they argue or bitch and moan about mean nothing in the grand scheme of it, and it goes down to, you're going to have most of the days in a marriage or in a relationship. They're not ones you're putting in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? But would you take those 2 to 3 weeks or that are absolutely perfect? You would. Mm-hmm. And would you do whatever means necessary for them to happen? You would. And was that me making some questionable omelets? You bet.
And the fact that he's on board with that being the tool by the end, I think it's just, it makes it in a weird way validates what she's doing, because she's not deceiving him any longer. He's like, yes, please help me. God, I don't know what the hell I'd do without you, Alma. It's kind of that dynamic. And I think in a weird way, her going in there and tearing the dress off of her, it's like, wait, it's wrong in a number of levels. But on the other hand, it's also like, well, she's fighting for his work, for what he values, in a way. How is that any different than like, if I get billed by the insurance company wrongfully and my wife's like, oh no, fuck this, I'm going to call them. and I'm gonna get that that charge removed or whatever. You know what I mean? Kind of stepping up and fighting for your partner. And I think that part of it definitely rings true in my life and just kind of my relationship experience. So I love that this sort of the way that power just goes back and forth, and the way that ultimately I think what makes Alma's I guess game, for lack of a better term, work, or makes us definitely on her side or more rooting for this relationship to happen, is that she is coming from a genuine place of care. Like she's going things out of, throwing off his routine, but in that way challenging him, and also trying to find a way to express herself. Like she tells Cyril, she's like, I want to love him the way I want to get to know him, or know him the way I want to, or whatever. Just basically, she wants it to come from her genuinely, not just, well, okay, what are the rules that I need to play by, in order to get a few minutes alone with him in this house crowded with like an entire staff of people.
No, I totally agree. And I think it then goes into those scenes in the middle of the film when the princess comes and she sees the kind of the little bit of him, kind of doing his old shtick with her, right? But it's not really like that, and it's the form of jealousy. Like I think he gets jealous at the end that she leaves for that party, right? And that he's like, oh, like he's also he plays a little coy with the doctor, right? Though that's planted in his head by this obnoxious woman. But there is that thing of that he becomes jealous at a certain point. Well, she's jealous really first because of this girl. And while she's being fitted, she goes from one person to the other, and she wishes her luck on her wedding, but she's like, I'm Alma. I live here. And it's that establishment of that Alma's not going anywhere. Like she loves being there. I mean, the whole scene where they make her dress, but then they also do the kind of fashion show, right? And her smiles throughout that entire time, and her looking at him as he is doing his craft, right? As he is setting the girl's hat on her head, or making sure that, the dress is, fixed to the right angle. She's looking at it as she's changing and going into her next, outfit. But she is doing what this movie does. She's examining him in his element and admiring it and loving it, right? And that's why she does the dinner. But even ultimately, she realizes that, wait, I shouldn't be talking like this. Like, this is stupid. Why am I jealous over this? Like, we were fine. We all do it. Like, I do it all the time with my wife. So I sympathize with Alma there, where we think we have to do this thing, but we were doing okay before that. There was no need to change the routine. And sometimes it then needs to be changed. No, it is that thing of like, what needs to be changed and what doesn't, right? What is the priority over that? Because by having this flash of guilt, she realizes, or having this jealousy, she realizes that, okay, maybe she broke up or the routine or whatever, but then she does get to the fundamental reason why she ends up doing the action she does later, which is that he's on the verge of killing what is a great thing in his life because of his stupid tough boy facade. And she's like, no, you're not this guy. And she knows that. And that's why she says, you're not like this. You're not that tough. She says this to him a couple of times, like, you're not that tough. He takes it as an insult, but it's not an insult. It is a way to kind of slap back the guard that he puts up. You know what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And no, and I like, as a writer, a podcaster, kind of a creative person, I love movies that speak to not only, that sort of, not false confidence, but that sort of like, in having a podcast, in writing anything, you're basically, there's an inherent bit of narcissism to that, in that I have something to say, that is worth listening to or reading or whatever. And so I love that there's sort of that, there's always that little part of any creative mind. It's the fragility to it, the sort of just how little it takes to throw everything off, how little it takes to kind of throw off. Not only, for him, it's the routine, it's the breakfast has to be quiet. I use, the amount of pressure that he has, that he's under as the figurehead of this fashion house, but also that he puts on himself in addition to that. I mean, he says, I think it's the assumptions and expectations of others that cause heartache. And I think that's really, that's a great line too. I wrote the whole thing down. It's, he has to feel like what he's doing is like he says, it's right because it's right. He's like, this is the way it is, because if this isn't the way it is, what the hell have I been doing with my life?
Everything before is meaningless, right? Because it's like, if Cyril says it's right, it's right. That's what the code book has been saying throughout my guidebook of life. And she is the wrench and all that, saying, no, there's a different way of life. Your clothes and your money and your rules, they're not good. They're not the only way to live.
Right.
Like, and injecting me into this, you don't adapt to me. I'm sorry. I'm not going to adapt to you, Reynolds. You're going to adapt to me. And that's what happens. And Cyril does it. Everyone else does it. He can do it. And by the end, he does, you know? So that is ultimately a compromise. That's compromising. Right. And that's exactly what you have to do in a relationship too. You have to compromise. If you are just stuck on your sides, then it's going to be a fight. And it's going to be a stupid fight. Like, where's your gun? Do you have a gun? I feel like I've been dropped behind enemy lines, but we all feel that. But ultimately at the end, you have to compromise. You have to grow the hell up. And he does, with a little nudging. Sometimes we need a little nudge.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to that in any creative capacity. You need to believe that what you're doing is worthwhile. Otherwise, it deflates everything. It throws you off your routine. Like, Cyril says, if breakfast is thrown off, it's really hard for him to recover for the rest of the day. And as a person, as a writer, and as someone who has to be in a certain level of concentrated headspace, I understand that. I don't act out the way that this guy does, obviously. Because otherwise my marriage probably wouldn't be going that well if I had behaved like that. Because, the level of arrogance and the hissy fit that he throws with the buttering the toast and things like that. But I also, there's an element of truth to that. And, in my research, this was inspired by a moment PTA had when he was sick and his wife was kind of tending to him. And I think he sort of sees the light there as far as when we're under the weather or sick or dealing with anything. I actually had last year, I think I had sort of like oral surgery. I had like, receding gum lines and things that needed to be tended to. And so I was like in a lot of pain. And during that period, I was like, oh my God, this is just like Phantom Thread, because I'm really appreciating my wife right now who's taking care of me and things like that. And sometimes it takes that sort of perspective to pull you away from your own bullshit and realize, wait a minute, this person actually cares for me. Maybe I should try a little bit harder, not to be an asshole or to cope better with the daily stresses. And, in the world of a pandemic that we're in right now, I think that's truer than ever, where families and couples are finding themselves stuck in quarantine together. I think there's a lot to sort of learn from Reynolds and Alma's story here.
No, I agree. I mean, it is also, I mentioned earlier, the little things, right, that start an argument, or some of the little things that you fall in love with a person, right, that over time they become annoyances. Like when she pours tea for him at the restaurant at the beginning of the film, she then does it at breakfast and he's like, what are you doing? And then right before she feeds him the omelet, the way she pours water right in that final sequence, it is the one last like, oh yeah, I'm pouring water like this. Tough. And it's like great.
Going out of her way to be like,
he is totally flexing in that moment.
Absolutely.
He is like, I got this, man. Like you are wrapped around my finger. But I agree with you. It's that, that thing that PTA always talked about when his wife did take care of him. And that look in her eye, right? And, I was sick, about a couple months ago, and it wasn't COVID. So everybody calm down. My
Wasn't a
wife
mushroom
took,
omelet.
it wasn't a mushroom omelet either
Okay,
that
that's
I
good.
know of.
Tum, tum, tum.
But my wife took care of me, and it really, first of all, some people are really good when they're sick. Some people aren't. I know I'm not. So I have to try to be better each time. And because it comes back around, because then I had to take care of my wife recently for a couple of days. And you really, I think, find empathy for the person that you're with when they are in their most vulnerable state. And I think when you are on the opposite end, you find so much attention and all those little things that you were probably mad about the day before you got sick or whatever, they all go by the wayside because of that want, that need, that drive to have that person that you love in your life and really want them to take care of you, because you know that they're there not to do that, but it's because you would do the same thing for them. Right. And that ultimately is this thing at the end of the film that I think about too, is just that, yeah, she's taking care of him, but the movie kind of ends with like him laid down and that hunger's back alive. Right. And when he said, like, the last line of the film is, yeah, I'm getting hungry. You know what I mean? And she smiles, but there's another little scene in the middle of the film that's shot very similar to that, with at the cabin there with the fire working, where he's writing or he's drawing, he's sketching, and she's threading, right? And it's like 10 seconds, right? It's not even that long, but it's such a big foreshadow to that final scene where they're in bliss, right? Where she's doing that voiceover and she says, it's a couple of days, everything, but it's quiet. And most of life is like that scene where you're on a couch, your wife's sitting there, or your partner, whoever's listening to this, is sitting over there, and you're sitting on the other end of the couch, and probably most likely you're on your phones. Let's just face it, we're on phones, or you're reading a book, or they're doing an activity, and you're just there. And you don't take that for granted. You know what I mean? Like, then it kind of goes back to, well, the argument that he says where, oh, you have me all the time. No, work doesn't count. Right. Like if I'm working at home right now, my wife's there, that doesn't count as time together. Those moments, even though you're not talking, you're together on a couch, or you're there, as he's sketching and she's doing the needlepoint. Those are the moments that she wants and she ultimately gets. And you can see that the turning point is made by the end. They have a baby. Obviously that takes a lot of, hopefully, responsibility on Reynolds' case. I would love to see just a short of how that turned out. But ultimately at the end, that's why I think it is togetherness, because they seem to have found a middle point by the end. They seem to have found that what am I trying to say? They found the middle ground. And therefore, once you find that, everything's gold. It breezes through it. Like people, when I first got married, they always were like, "Oh, are you nervous?" And then it's like, I've been with my wife for, I've been in a relationship with my wife. We've been married for 2 years. We've been together 12.
Wow.
Okay. So we've been through it all, folks. And I tell you, it's not easy, but marriage is just another thing. It's paperwork. What really is the thing is the relationship itself. And if it's built on a foundation of trust, admiration, respect, and compromise, then everything is peaches and cream. All the small stuff falls by the wayside. And you got to just learn when to pick your battles.
Right.
Ultimately. And these two are very formative, adversaries at times. And that's what you feel like in a relationship, but they know how to pick their battles. And ultimately, Oma picks the right one, and she ultimately wins the war, which is to have a semi-normal relationship with the man she loves.
And so much, I have a lot to respond to what you're saying, because I 100% agree with that. It's only through relationship and being in it that you're able to really grow as a person too. I mean, he says in the one of the best scenes in the movie, the confrontation scene at dinner where she made the dinner for him, that whole thing, where she's like, "Oh, what is it?" He's like, "Oh, I'm admiring my own gallantry," which is, I love the way he phrased that. The fact that she's like, I like my asparagus made with I forget what it is.
He likes it with oil
And salt, I
but,
think, or something.
Yeah, oil
she
and
made
salt,
it with butter.
With butter, yes.
Right. And it's one of those like things that, yeah, if you're living the bachelor life for, I guess in Reynolds' case, decades, you're going to be like, well, this is how I eat asparagus. Why would you make it this way? But it's kind of it's a sticking point for a relationship that you're going to have those sort of early elements that you're going to have to work through in order to grow and broaden your horizon. And yeah, maybe the person you're with is into jazz, and maybe you don't like jazz, but guess what? She wants to, in this movie, she wants to go to the party. She wants to go dancing. She hangs out with you working on dresses all the time. So you have to kind of bend a little bit. And I think there's so much truth to that. And, even being at home constantly, my wife still says to me sometimes, like, I feel like I haven't seen you. And I'm like, what do you mean? We were just here. We're in the house all the time. This is all we do. And it's that quality time, that one-on-one, actually being present with each other as opposed to being in the same room. It's a very different thing. I wanted to also point out a couple other things that we hadn't mentioned specifically. One of the other best lines in the movie that we didn't point out is when she's bringing him the tea.
Oh my God!
And she's like, it's a little late, isn't it? And she's like, oh, okay, I'm taking it. It's going. It's like, the tea is going. The interruption is staying right here with me.
So that's so true.
It's
so true.
It's so true, but it's stated so beautifully. Also, I wanted to also touch on the title of the movie, which stems from a conversation that they have early on in their relationship, where he's explaining about he has a lock of his mom's hair sewn into the canvas of his coat, and that you can sew almost anything in there, hidden messages and all kinds of things like that. In your mind, what is, or in your interpretation, what is the significance of the concept of a phantom thread as far as it pertains to their relationship?
Oh my God. Wow. Dang, Rob, that's a great question. Cause that's one I've tackled with for years, seeing this movie. Oh my God. I mean, I think it all stems from that idea of this being connected to Rebecca and this idea of what the mother represents. She is this figure. He's had these dreams, where he talks about, like, I had this with Cyril right before he goes to the countryside and meets Alma. He talks about he had this dream of her, right? And her just calling out to him. And there's all these things that, that he hasn't thought about from her in a long time. And then he talks about having her with him and then talking about this curse and that his mother is this figure that is hanging large over his life, because his life work basically is dedicated, and Cyril's life work is dedicated to his mother. And Alma's the one that asks him about his mother. And, because he says you should carry her with you always, because, we always carry our loved ones we've lost with us. But he literally carries a lock of hair inside there. He talks about that you could have secrets, you could have this or that in there. And, then you see the dress, right, that he makes for the princess, and it says never cursed, right? Or not cursed or something like that. And because he's hopeful that she can have the bliss that he thinks he can't have. So ultimately the thread part is obviously, it's all about, sewing together in a dress or whatever you want on the basic level. But really this phantom thread, I think, if you're putting me on the spot, Rob, is ultimately about him weaving a new line of thinking in his life beyond the pressures of his past. And the person threading the needle is Alma. And therefore, literally, we see that she's threading things throughout this entire movie. But ultimately, she is weaving a thread of him finding remorse from his haunted past, but also him having a life, and she can finally represent a constant in his life that isn't going to ultimately drive him mad. It's going to get him sick, but it's not going to drive him mad. And
Yeah,
so
he'll feel like he's going to die, but he won't.
Yeah, but exactly, which I love that because oh my God. I don't understand. We haven't mentioned this. I don't understand how the screenplay didn't get nominated for an Academy Award. I know it was a very heavy year. I think it was like Lady Bird and Shape of Water and Get Out and The Big Sick. And I think it was Dunkirk was the other one that got in there. I would throw that Dunkirk screenplay out now, or maybe even, and I love The Big Short, but not The Big Short, The Big Sick. I'm sorry. The Big Sick was it. And I would probably take that because this screenplay, I mean, it's so memeable. It's so, it's so quotable, memeable, however you want to say it, however you want to do it. Like there's so many things within this movie that I think back on lines and you've said some too, that are just, I love, we haven't, one of my favorite lines, and I think it's very underrated. It is in the butter scraping scene, right? And it's like a bunch of horses just galloped in here. You know what I mean? Like it's so true. Like we come up with the most elaborate things when our spouse or they come up with the same thing too. When to over exaggerate the issue that is so small at hand. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm interested. What do you think the ending or the title of the film represents?
I think it's obvious. It's of course a reference to his mother's lock of hair sewn into his coat, but I think it's about that burden that he's been carrying of his past, of his loneliness, his grief, his sort of the baggage, the emotional baggage that he has. And as you were saying, I'm going to kind of crib a little bit from your notes here. As you were saying about Alma threading throughout the movie, I think it's about Alma kind of being the person in his life to come in and to help him make sense of his emotions, to kind of bring him a sense of balance, and sort of make peace with his past trauma. Lately, this is totally a little mini tangent, but lately I've been really into, I know this was not a hugely critically lauded movie, but I was really big into It Chapter 2 lately. I just got the Blu-ray sitting here, so I was watching that a lot. And that whole thing is about literally the literal demons of their childhood and them trying to make peace with their trauma and find a new way of sort of starting a life free of that and kind of unburdened and seeing a world of new possibilities beyond the sort of the whatever event happened in their past, whether it's in this case for Reynolds, the loss of his mother and everything that has happened since then, and kind of stop viewing himself as incurable, as cursed, as having a sour heart, and sort of picking up the pieces of his life and creating something brand new out of that. And so I think I was sort of kind of in line with what you were thinking, but it's definitely, he's definitely been haunted by his mother literally in this movie at one point. So I think that's really the phantom thread, is just kind of the ghost of his past that he can't seem to shake.
No, for sure. And it's oh God, it's such a great title. And I got to think about it more. Maybe the next time I see it, I'll pick up something else and I'll have to let you know. But
yeah.
No, I for sure. I mean, there is those little elements, right? And it is that thing that I think that scene when he does see his mom, and he's on the kind of deathbed and he's talking to her. I think that's one, it's beautifully lit. Like PTA did his own cinematography on this. Maybe, I don't know. It sounds like he did.
He sounds like he didn't really want to take full credit for it.
Yeah,
he got a lot
but he didn't also want to give anyone full credit. I don't know. It was a weird thing with that cinematography, but that scene is so beautifully lit and it's very haunting. That's the only time this movie that is very funny and very dark at times can be haunting, like have that Hitchcockian vibe to it, right? And what we haven't talked about beyond the costumes, which are just out of bounds here and just extraordinary, is that house itself, the House of Woodcock, right? The staircase and all the rooms and how there's this underneath, and it's just this whole, it feels like this giant scope of a place, right? With endless doors and oh my God, like I want to find that place just to walk up those stairs. That staircase is out of bounds. I mean, it's one of those things where you set up a world and you got to find it, and they scout located for that perfectly. And I think of the score and how it plays with it, right? The piano kind of, dun 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 dun, and the way, Greenwood's, score for There Will Be Blood or The Master, I think they're very big scores, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this one is more classic. It relies more on the piano, and then of course towards the end, when you get to the big booms off the drums, and then the strings, right, and it feels very eerie at the end, especially with the omelet scene. Like, there's so much going on within the craft of this movie, beyond just the meta elements and what we see on screen with the story. All the craft is elevated to a great height, as it is mostly done in a lot of PTA films.
Yeah, I mean, even though I have been historically sort of reticent to really embrace PTA's movies, even back in 2007 when I saw There Will Be Blood, I was like, I don't know about this movie. This is not what I thought it would be, or whatever. Even then, I was like, but this performance is amazing, and look how well made this movie is. And like on a technical level, his films are pretty much beyond reproach. I think as far as the Oscar for Best Screenplay not getting, the screenplay not getting a nomination, I think it's largely due to just, like you said, the competition, and also the fact that this movie it takes a couple of watches to really kind of get immersed in what the actual story is about. Yes, it sounds, the lines are great and the acting is wonderful, which is why, of course, DDL and Leslie Manville got nominations. But I think that's probably why some people were like, I don't know, where was he going for with that? I didn't get a chance to see it again. It's, it's because it is kind of, in a way, a dense movie. I mean, look, we've talked about it more. We've gone over time with talking about this movie, and I feel like you probably still have a lot of your 4.5 pages of notes left.
I have so many notes, but no, I mean, but what's surprising about the screenplay, lack of screenplay nomination, I guess you could say, is that he's surprise nominated in Best Director. I mean, deservedly so, but nobody that morning saw Phantom Thread getting the love it got, right? I remember a lot of people telling me it's DDL costumes and that's it. And then like Manville got in, obviously the score got in, which was great. And then like when they got picture and director, I was like, okay, then why didn't he get screenplay? Because, right. It's crazy that the master screenplay and this screenplay didn't get in, but Inherent Vice got in. Like the one that really doesn't have like a good script. Like I wouldn't like bank my money on the Inherent Vice script. So it's interesting the Academy's appreciation for PTA in certain craft areas, but it's a wonderful movie. It could have been nominated across the board. I mean, we didn't even talk about like how DDL got in there and Leslie Manville, but Vicky Krieps should have totally been in a Best Actress conversation. She's so good in this movie. And I don't think I know we've talked about Alma, but through all of Alma, you get this immaculate performance that is one of my favorites I've ever seen. I mean, she's so good. And it's really hard to go tat for tat against someone like Daniel Day-Lewis or Leslie Manville, because they're great. And she definitely holds her own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also if she is obviously the one entering the world of Reynolds Woodcock. So in large way, she's also in kind of an argument. There's an argument to be made for that she is the protagonist of the movie.
Yes.
That she's the audience surrogate. Yeah. She's our doorway into this man and his meticulously laid plans, basically.
I mean, we're in the House of Woodcock, and it's Daniel Day-Lewis's last movie. Yeah, I get that. This is Alma's story. Like she is the first person we hear in this movie. She is. Yeah, she's the last person we hear. She gets first and last say. Which says a lot
in the movie and in the House of Woodcock, as it turns out.
Yeah, no, she is the lead. This is her film. Like, this is Alma's story, and weaved in it is this. Yeah, it's these crazy characters, the Woodcocks. But I totally agree with you there. Yeah, it's totally Alma's story. And yeah, she's our audience because like there are moments like with the dress, like going back to the dress just real quick, like I'm sitting in there like I'm agreeing with them. I'm like, yeah, like somebody may not put all that time and effort. You saw how much time and effort it put that wedding dress back together. Like how much time did it take to put that whole thing? And she's like wiping and she's drunk, not appreciative. Yeah, go get that dress. Go do it. And it leads to like, I love that part. I love the scene where like in the scene where the Barbarosa's son comes out and he's like, "Give me Mr. Woodcock." And he just goes, "Cal." And then the kid just runs because he knows like, I don't want to be a part of this. I'm getting the hell out of here. I love it. This movie is one of the funniest movies I think I've ever seen. And as more and more I watch it, I laugh a lot because it hits on a lot of things that are very personal. And it's also like kind of a sneakily romantic comedy then in that sense, not in like the traditional sense, but in a very dark sense, because it has this romance element and it is extremely hilarious. And it's all those little things, right, in life, all the little things that make it so funny and interesting and also dumb. So, but yeah, no, it's great.
Is there anything else about Phantom Thread that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure we sneak in there before we start wrapping up?
Oh my God. No, I don't think so. I saw this film with my wife. My wife liked it. She's like, she, you know what? We go back to compromises to my wife. She hadn't really ever seen a Paul Thomas Anderson film in her life. And I showed her a lot of them, as a guy and, that likes movies and stuff. And she's put up with a lot of them. But she actually does like Paul Thomas Anderson movies. Except Magnolia. She's like, what the frogs? What the hell?
Yeah, that's the make or break for
that's the make or break. And I don't fault her for that. I don't fault anybody for not liking them. I get it. But then I went and saw this again with it was weird. DDL and Paul Thomas Anderson, and I took my mom because she really wanted to see it because she was like, we saw There Will Be Blood, and we laughed a lot in it. You know what I mean? And then we rewatched it, me and my wife, with some friends of ours and everything, and we were all laughing. And so I think that, and as we've talked over time, she's like tired of the movie because I've seen it so many times, and she's like, okay, I get it. It's a great movie, but put something else on. But I love this experience. It's one of my favorite movie going experiences of the last decade is to watch that with her and walk out. And I think that's what we miss right now. Is walking out of a movie theater and having these wonderful conversations with our significant others, at least for me.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like that, and probably yourself, Rob, because those car rides home, those are like the best experiences you can have. And so with everybody right now, you can't really have that. You can have them in the house. I mean, moving from the couch to the kitchen's a different, it doesn't have as glamorous as the 20-minute ride home, but that's what I also remember about this movie is having those conversations and getting a lot of the thoughts and opinions and her calling, saying you kind of do it like that and me doing, kind of pointing back in fingers. And it's a real interactive one. So I would say, you're in a relationship and you want to test the waters and you want to see how it's going, put on this movie and see where they lie
and see what happens. Yeah. It's like,
see what they think of the ending,
Phantom Thread or Gone Girl. Those are your options. If you're in a invested long-term relationship and you're like, let's spice things up a little bit. Let's get a status update on our relationship. How are things really going?
Exactly.
Great. Well, Ryan McQuade, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan McQuade 77 and on Instagram at Ryan McQuade 77. And you can find my stuff at InSessionFilm.com and awardcircuit.com. And thank you so much, Rob, for having me on. And I'm sorry I went over. I'm just
no, it's all good.
So excited.
No, it's all good. And this is one of those movies that I was more conflicted about before when we at the start of the conversation. But as we've talked it out, I'm like, yeah, maybe I didn't think of it that way. I'm starting to and that's the other fun thing about this podcast is having, getting a chance to see movies I hadn't seen before, or going back and revisiting things that I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, but I need to watch it more closely now because I'm going to talk about it on the podcast. Let me kind of dig into it a little bit more. And you always, by the end of the conversation, I have at least a greater appreciation for the movie. So I definitely need to just go back and do a deep dive into the PTA oeuvre and see where I come out on the other end, because he's definitely at the minimum a very interesting and dynamic filmmaker. And so people listening that haven't caught up with some of his older movies, I would definitely suggest you do that before the movie theaters open again. And then, you know, we're going to be talking about Tenet and Wonder Woman and Mulan and whatever else big budget kind of spectacle things are eventually going to hit theaters. Yeah, definitely check this out. And if you've seen it before and sort of dismissed it, kind of, I would definitely give it another shot, because there's, as we've talked about this episode, there's a lot to talk about with Phantom Thread. And who knows, while you're in quarantine, it'll make for an interesting
experiment. It's a good quarantine experiment.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much, Ryan. We'll have to have you come back on, talk about something else in the near future. Just let me know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll have to figure out what next I want to go back and look at, because that was the thing, is picking this. I hadn't seen it in a while, and it gave me a great chance. And thank you so much, Rob, for having me on again.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, Ryan.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.